Are you saying Joe Biden is a bad person?
Is this what you're implying?
I'm not saying.
I'm saying
maybe.
Have you seen Joe Biden?
Well, what I'm implying is that you shouldn't be copying American politics and trying to use mottos such as
Are you accusing us of copying Joe Biden? No.
That's exactly what I'm doing.
Oh my god.
I was at Clonmel once. Plays it up.
It's lights out, away we go. Hamilton gets away well, and he's getting towards Max Verstappen now. Tries to cover him off and pushes it. All day and all night.
Good evening, and welcome back to the Sammy Show.
I can tell you that it was me who made the decision not to serve
You did.
us. Not
That's
only
interesting though, because the messages I saw said that you were forced out of the party. Now go to our investigative journalist who's been responsible for the leaks day in the DCMS. We saw the DCMS secretary publicly endorsing LBC, which is a company owned by Dean, which conveniently actually signed Conor Novak as one of their new talk show hosts. Do you think this is a inside job by Conor Novak and Dean Heathcote, that they were planning to move Jeff Milby from the start?
I can't really remember now, but I remember being quite annoyed how somebody could just come out of seemingly nowhere in two terms.
The way that the Conservatives screwed that election was definitely surprising too.
I was forced by the government chief whip, James Ascot, to write an apology letter. After then, things only got worse.
Are you saying Joe Biden is a bad person?
Is this what you're implying?
I'm not saying.
I'm saying
maybe.
Have you seen Joe Biden?
Well, what I'm implying is that you shouldn't be copying American politics and trying to use mottos such as
Are you accusing us of copying Joe Biden? No.
That's exactly what I'm doing.
Oh my god.
I was at Clonmel once. Plays it up.
It's lights out, away we go. Hamilton gets away well, and he's getting towards Max Verstappen now. Tries to cover him off and pushes it. All day and all night.
Good evening, and welcome back to the Sammy Show.
I can tell you that it was me who made the decision not to serve
You
us.
did.
Not
That's
only
interesting though, because the messages I saw said that you were forced out of the party. Now go to our investigative journalist who's been responsible for the leaks day in the DCMS. We saw the DCMS secretary publicly endorsing LBC, which is a company owned by Dean, which conveniently actually signed Conor Novak as one of their new talk show hosts. Do you think this is a inside job by Conor Novak and Dean Heathcote, that they were planning to move Jeff Milby from the start?
I can't really remember now, but I remember being quite annoyed how somebody could just come out of seemingly nowhere in two terms.
The way that the Conservatives screwed that election was definitely surprising too.
I was forced by the government chief whip, James Ascot, to write an apology letter. After then, things only got worse.
roadside.
Police emergency.
Warning Marco's violent kidnap and robbery.
Open the door!
Taser, get over here now!
Don't start resisting. Don't start resisting, mate.
Derbyshire's traffic cops, chasing criminals in the heart of the country.
Stay where you are! Stay where you are!
Policing 1,000 square miles.
Get out! Get out now!
Yeah, they're crossing the southbound carriageway and Paz. We've got them inside.
Dealing with the dangerous and desperate. In life and death situations.
There's a smell of gas, so can you go inside the house?
Please stay where you are!
Under pressure. And under threat.
He was sat with that behind his back.
Every day is a new challenge for the traffic cops.
Now, a party election broadcast by
the 9 Kean Party.
Britain is broken. We have a government we did not vote for and one we do not want, but we have the power to change this. We will continue to take to the streets until we get what we want. We demand a 9 government.
Hello, good evening ladies and gentlemen, this is Jay Chan from GB News, hosting event of J Factor. Here we have Callum, the shadow leader of the House of Commons from Reclaim Party,
House of Lords,
and Thomas, shadow Home Secretary, Reclaim Party, and Killian, member of the public. Would you like to introduce yourself first, Thomas? Thomas?
Yeah, of course, I'd like to introduce myself. I'd just like to thank you, first of all, Jay and Tim and everyone who's organised this show. Thank you for letting me on. Obviously, it's a very tumultuous time in politics. So I am currently serving as the Shadow Home Secretary. Hopefully next term I will be the Home Secretary. I've served in frontline politics for about 6 or 7 months. Altogether, I've served in numerous cabinet positions. Not all of them very important or significant, but I know what I'm doing and I know how to articulate myself.
This is great to hear. And would you like to introduce yourself? One of our quite an old guests, really, Callum.
Hello, I am the proposed leader of the House of Lords for the Reclaim Party, and I am a big activist against this coalition shambles.
And would you like to introduce yourself, Killian?
I would, yeah. I am, of course, Thomas Horace Shaw's beloved partner, and an avid hater of the Coalition of Chaos.
So I can see both three of you are against the coalition. It's quite hard to find people who support the coalition, I guess, if you're wondering behind your computer or television. And I'd like to say the things a lot have changed since last night. where there's already involving conflicts and civil unrest on the street. But today it seems to have even worsened. Until just before this show, there was a special coverage about the civil unrest by the free speech by the free speech event, and but as a political correspondent on Westbridge, I was shot 3 times, stabbed once, and at the end of the show, I'm dead. So that's quite bad. The situation is not good, and I want to know what is your thoughts on this.
Who goes
Let's
first?
start with you, Thomas, because you're the Shadow Home Secretary. What's your plan?
Violence is never the answer. However, people do need to send a message across. As the proposed Home Secretary and the Shadow Home Secretary, I've outlined the plans that Reclaim would implement if we were in government, and it has been supported by members of the Metropolitan Police, and it has been viewed over 600 times on Twitter. We will make sure that permits are allowed for organised demonstrations. That means that safe and sensible demonstrations that do not put anyone at harm will be allowed, and they will not be interfered with at all by the police unless they become chaotic. However, we are seeing the police getting confused because the process of tackling a protest is complex and it is ambiguous. We need to end that, and as Home Secretary, I will.
I see. And would you let's say as Shadow Home Secretary condemn the type of violence that was seen on the street today and yesterday?
No.
Why won't you? Why won't you condemn the
I'm
violence?
a firm believer that they are fighting for what is right for the country.
But do you believe that let's say the stabbings and some of the very fatal events that happened on police officers are justified?
They're not justified, but I don't think that they're unjustified as well. I think it's a very grey area. And I think that they're fighting for what they believe is right. And the police obviously shouldn't be harmed. People shouldn't be harmed. But at the end of the day, God endowed us with the freedom to live and the freedom to do what we want. And it is not my place to condemn the people that are fighting for what they think is right.
Thank you very much.
And I agree with them.
And Callum, I'm aware that you are a very quite a frequent guest to GB News and other news outlets, and you yourself has been a long politician here. But you must have a plan for what has to be going on to address these civil unrest, which many people feel have to be stopped. So what is your plan?
What do you mean? Well, I can't do much already. It's down to the government for them to finally step down, and then all the protests will stop. That's it, really.
I see. Killian, would you like to address what you feel about the current unrest at the street?
Well, look, like I said to you, objectively speaking, the riots are a complete culmination of Reba Astor's misguided and rudderless leadership. This is evident, right? This is evident in her immediate abandonment of principles, of Labour principles, and, immediately joining up with the Conservatives. And many opposition members of Parliament have been spotted partaking in the riots. And you can view that as a negative, but I think that highlights one serious thing, and that's the divisive nature of British politics at the moment. I think it's very easy to condemn politicians because, whether you like it or not, they can be very duplicitous, two-faced. But I think the condemnation really right. I think the point of contention here is the royal household, and where does Robert Wellesley fit into all of this? Because the images show that he was suggesting that party leaders abandon their principles and immediately form a grand coalition of sorts simply due to the nature of politics. And whether you like it or not, Reba Astor and Marcus Stroisvant, however you pronounce his surname, they're scapegoats of Robert Wellesley's leadership and his completely I suppose, thoughtlessness decisions. And I think what we're seeing here is a complete culmination of all of these factors into violence on the streets. But I'm going to have to disagree with Thomas, believe it or not. I don't think violence is the answer, and I would condemn violence on the streets at the moment because we've had peaceful protests. But the violence I'm condemning is not the violence that people are claiming is occurring, right? Believe it or not, those on the streets, and I've been on the front lines of those protests, people are not immediately taking up arms against the government. No, what we're seeing is emergency services under ambiguity, right, in these protests, are
I
immediately
agree.
lighting vehicles on fire, as Callum saw earlier, and using their weapons in a way that they should never be utilised. And you can either blame the emergency services or blame the people in charge of them. And I think that's what I'm getting at there.
Do you think that the police response is quite chaotic to these riots or protests?
Oh, without a doubt, that's objective. That's objective truth right there. The police response has been
I think
inadequate.
we've seen a lot of these clips and a lot of those response from police themselves. I think Thomas, he himself have a plan is to make a license for protesting. And Killian, because you're a member of public, you
That's
clearly
not true. I think the way that
No?
you phrase that is it could be misconstrued by
so you can correct your own record.
by the government. So the policy is, and it's a policy that is popular. It's a popular policy, and the Reclaim Party are united behind the policy. And it's that organised demonstrations that want to be free from police interference. What they will be able to do is they will be able to go to the Home Office, they will be able to apply for a permit, and they will be able to demonstrate in a selected area, which obviously they get to choose. If it gets dangerous and there is an immediate threat to the safety of the public, the Metropolitan Police will be able to clamp down on the concentrated area of demonstration and then end it.
I
They
see
will do that
that
by
this is a
revoking the permit. The only people that will get their permit denied when they apply will be those who have a previous conviction, those who are on the national security list, or those who have had their permit revoked within a week or so. We're not trying to ban protests. What we are trying to do is we're trying to allow for more freedom for organised demonstrations, which we are seeing semi-organised, semi-unorganised demonstrations. We want to end that. We want to make Met's job as simple as possible.
I see. This is actually the policy used by many countries in real life. So I thank you very much, Thomas, for clarifying. So do you support Thomas' idea, Killian?
I think Thomas's idea has, plenty of potential, and whether you like it or not, it would be much more beneficial than the current government policy, which is to, I suppose, pretend there are no protests. So I suppose that's a bit of a one-up. But I do have questions for Thomas on that policy, actually, because it's actually intrigued me, Thomas, if you wouldn't mind answering them.
Yeah, of course.
Certainly. Would there be penalties in place for those who, partake in demonstrations that were not, I don't want to say licensed, permitted by the Home Office?
The only demonstrations that will require a permit will be the demonstrations that the organisers, because they will be organised demonstrations. The only people that will need a permit are the organisers of said organised demonstrations. The organised demonstrations will be defined by statute. It will be defined by statute when we introduce the bill, when we are in
That's
government.
understandable, but my
There will
question is...
not be any penalties apart
no
from
penalties.
the current penalties that we see now for pop-up protests.
Right,
However,
that clears up the ambiguity then.
There is a huge ambiguity in the system between a pop-up protest and an organised protest. The permits will prevent police interference on organised demonstrations and protests because the permit will allow them to be immune to police interference unless there is a threat to the public safety, the police must make the accommodations. So that must mean that they must cone off streets for where they're demonstrating, etc., etc. The only people that will be penalised will be those who break the terms and conditions of the permit, which are to keep the public safe. And if they do not make sure that happens, it's on the organisers. The organisers will take the fall. The organisers will be arrested. The organisers will get their permit removed, and they will be suspended from making applications on permits for a week or so.
Oh, thank you very much, Thomas.
If that organised demonstration becomes a danger, then the Metropolitan Police can instantly remove that permit and immediately crack down on the violence.
Incredible.
Yes, thank you very much, Thomas, for clarifying your policy. So, Killian, you seems to be supporting this policy.
Certainly, I think let's face the facts, right? Any alternative to the current system is one that is absolutely positive. It's infinitely more positive than the current system, which is to ignore or even partake by the government. By the way, this is their approach: ignore or even partake in the protests occurring, which is, whether you like it or not, laughable by any standard and by any reflection. So I think Thomas should absolutely be praised for this alternative system. But no, certainly the UK will benefit from a system like that. And I think the question now is, moving forward, what's the government's approach going to be? Because we're not, whether you like it or not, I don't think we're going to see an interim government anytime soon. His Majesty the King seems to be opposed to such a measure. The Grand Coalition of Chaos even seems to be opposed to such a measure. So I think what we're going to see is a continuation of this approach of ignoring or sometimes even fueling the current demonstrations in Westbridge.
Thomas, as Shadow Home Secretary, do you think your proposal will get passed in Parliament?
We will not be proposing it while we are in opposition.
It
is not the job of the opposition, especially in opposition that has 17 members. If we form a pact with progressives, 10 members if we don't. We will not be proposing flagship policies in a government in a parliament where the government has 43 seats. It's unproductive, and the government can easily claim our idea as theirs.
So, do you support Reclaim Shadow Home Secretary's idea or not? Get engaged by joining the Discord server of GB News, do the call-ins, and show your opinions. Get involved. And again, Callum, what do you think about? Because it's for Callum and Thomas. Because as Reclaim Party, you seems not being planning to propose this policy in the House of Parliament. So, do you have a confidence that eventually it will be taken by the government? Have you make any sort of approach to contact the Home Secretary about?
The government has mocked. When I was on the BBC, the government and the Home Secretary mocked the permits pass. The Home Secretary doesn't even believe that the protests are happening. They made a statement that the protests don't happen. However, tomorrow, if the protests continue, the government will be legally required to release a statement as per the government transparency statute.
And what are we doing to urge?
Then they are in direct contradiction to the law.
Yes, but Thomas, if you're not proposing in the House of Parliament, you have made seemingly the government have not been accepting the fact that protests exist according to you, and this policy is needed. What kind of approach are you taking to push this policy through? Because I can see from what we see from Killian's idea and Reclaim's idea that it is an urgently needed policy to end the ambiguity.
Needed policy.
And what are you doing to put it through?
Needs to be implemented by a competent government, because only a competent government can execute the policy in the way that I envision it. And that competent government will come with a Reclaim government. We will not see it in this coalition of chaos, the anti-growth coalition. It's not going to happen.
Are you looking? But right now, it's an urgently needed policy. So, are you making attempt
It's
to?
not our job as the opposition to govern the country.
I think Thomas is right. It is not the responsibility of the opposition to legislate what the government is
Not-
failing, and I think
not being
the
funny.
government should take the fall for it. The government should take the fall for these.
But
lack
many
of
people
measures.
have got.
Yeah,
Many
but
people
if
got to
Reclaim
me
did,
saying,
if Reclaim did propose this, the government will take 100% credit for it, and they know it.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
they'll have to implement it if it passes. What's it called, House laws, whatever, blah blah blah. They're gonna implement it and claim it. They did it. They're gonna take the credit for it. That's the problem.
but it's many people came to me saying, it is an urgently needed policy.
I mean,
Yes,
that
it
a
is.
change is needed
Unfortunately,
by how the police deal with protesters.
we had
But
an
seemingly, you
officer
seems to
on
be
the
more
BBC.
pessimistic about
We had an
how
officer on the
it should be
BBC
done.
who actually supported our policy because I think they were an inspector. They supported our policy because they knew that our policy was correct, that our policy would be effective, and it would, in the grand scheme of things, positively impact the Metropolitan Police. That
I don't
is,
think, I have to say though, I don't think just because a policy is urgently needed does not mean it's suddenly our responsibility to implement it. I mean, I think there are a dozen different examples I could provide here, but like a solution to climate change is urgently needed, but there are many people who believe it's not their responsibility to fulfill it, you know? This is an urgently needed policy, but unfortunately the opposition
But
isn't going
when
to
pressure
implement it.
groups or opposition parties propose something that they do truly believe they are urgent needs, it's happened both in real life and in game. They should be
The efforts speak
contacting
for
the government
themselves.
about it. They should
The
be
efforts speak for themselves.
doing
We've
petitions.
spoken about it.
They
We've
should be
spoken about it
proposing in
with the government
parliament.
well,
leaders.
maybe
We've
if
been
the
on the side on
government,
the
I
front
don't
line.
know, if the government was more transparent and if the government cared more about their shockingly terrible approval ratings. Actually, I don't know when I last checked, but last time it was 105 people disapproved of the coalition going
Three
ahead,
quarters.
and 35% of 30,
And also,
35 people approved. And
on
the
Thomas's
only people,
point, if I do may interrupt, we already know there's infighting within the government. Two people have told me there's been arguments last night in the Discord server about policy, about the government. They don't want to be in this government. They've been forced in. They seriously don't want it, but they can't resign because, like King Robbie said in the photo, two political parties will be deregistered. It is a shambles.
I mean, yeah, and especially coming from Reclaim, I think it's because we're going on circle on how you propose this policy. I think many people have reached a conclusion out behind the computer. So let's talk about the royal family. The royal family had gone into a lot of scandals because of the coalition government,
As they
and
deserve.
make people question about the place where the royal family should play in modern UK and on this community, and especially on the political climate of this community. So I want to ask about Killian. What is your thought as the public about this the monarchy we're having now?
Well, look, unfortunately, the monarchy it's an outdated institution.
But you say it's an outdated institution. Would you echo that, Callum? Would you think it is?
It is.
Because apparently your right wing party Reclaim in real life reflection is a very pro monarchy party. Would you say as a in Roblox Reclaim actually many members of Reclaim or even the party itself have believed the monarchy has to go?
No, we support the monarchy. Reclaim supports it.
You do support the monarchy?
Yes, Reclaim does. Of course we do.
I think the monarchy can be very beneficial. I think a head of state
Yes.
is such an important role, but I do not think Robert Wellesley is fulfilling that role at the moment. Unfortunately, and I'm saying this as my own individual opinion, of course, I do not think Robert Wellesley is fulfilling his role as monarchy right now when he interferes in politics.
I think
so.
he
You are
forces
supporting
the hand to our
this
leaders.
institution.
I think he
but
knows
not
he's
Robbie
made-
himself.
He knows he's
Behind
made
the
this. He
I
knows
think
he's
it's
made a
I
mistake,
think
but
it's
he
a
needs
bit
to
more
correct it.
nuanced. I think it's a bit more nuanced than this. I think Robbie has done such a good job being that figure of stability since Tom left. But I think he's become obsessed. I think he's become obsessed with his image. And I think his obsession with his image has led to this. Because if he was to implement an interim government, which is the popular alternative, he was worried he'd look like Tom. and he would worry that the people would turn on him. However, the people have already because he's allowed and he's forced this
Okay, ask a question to
grand
Sam,
coalition.
Electoral Commissioner. He's in the studio.
Hello there, it's great to be on the show.
He's a rigger.
Yeah, oh, wonderful. We have a call in from. Would
I'm
you
in the
like to?
studio. I'm just
Are you?
behind these two gentlemen.
It's really quite ominous, actually.
We might need a new chair, but here we go.
Let me move the chair.
Welcome to
I
the
will.
studio.
Thank you very much.
I do apologise keeping you standing.
I can quickly interrupt. I have just received an open letter to the Prime Minister from Archie. It's signed from the Archie, and it says, "I write to you as a serving member of the National Executive Committee in the Labour Party, and as a this is the official letter, and as a concerned citizen of the United Kingdom, I write to implore you." Oh dear, Archie, to see past the urge for electoral success and the throne of government, and to listen to what the people of this country have to say. He then goes to talk about that he's no longer as prominent, and he's saying that he says that, and I quote, "This coalition will only continue to damage the country. Damages."
I think many people will echo about this point, and it is going. Who's Archie, by the way? Remind me.
Archie is a member of the National Executive Committee of the Labour Party.
He's been Labour. So
He's
Jay,
been
a bit of history on Archie. He's the first Secretary of State under Dina Heathcote.
I think it's that actually demonstrate how people across the political spectrum are frustrated about this coalition and the current situation. And we have two Reclaim guests here, and who already expressed multiple times about why the coalition seems to be very damaging, as they think. We have an Electoral Commission member who is called Sangoose sitting in the studio now. Would you like to have a word about your thought on this current situation? Do you think an election, as people proposed, will solve the problem?
Thank you for having me on the show, and I'd be very happy to answer your questions on this matter. I think people are losing sight of what they actually want out of this process. You see, we've just had two elections with very similar results, with very similar outcomes. It was almost
rigged elections.
Rigged elections. Why do you say that, Thomas?
We won North Yorkshire and we won North Yorkshire big. Those are the facts.
I'm sorry?
We won North Yorkshire and we won North Yorkshire by big numbers.
Oh, I see. No, you did not. It's a Tory heartland, unfortunately. But
is the election
you could try better next time.
Is there evidence supporting
it was the
that
Tory
election?
heartland under me. They love me.
Well, right, but is there a solid evidence saying that? Because you need to back up your claim as a shadow.
No, I was just joking. I wasn't
joking.
All right. So, would you like to continue, Sangoose? Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. So, what I believe the king did, and I think he was very fair in doing this, in my opinion.
You would say that because you were at the meeting.
Would we let
I was at the
Sangoose
meeting,
hear?
and you could see myself in the paper making comments that the party should try work together in order to find a solution that could work for Parliament to get them through and to form a stable government. Because we can't be without governments for a week on end, no policies being made, no decisions, no real mandate.
So you are supporting the coalition?
I am not one way or the other. I am bound by impartiality. What I did support was parties working together to find an agreeable coalition or supply and confidence deal. They decided to go for coalition rather than supply and confidence, which would have been a perfectly, reasonable outcome. Let's say if the Tories just wanted to vote through the King's speech, that could have worked. Instead, these two largest parties decided to form a coalition, and in fact, people say it's strange or they feel betrayed by what Labour have done, especially those in the Reclaim Party or even the Progressives, although the Progressives don't really have that much of a voice in this matter from what I've heard. But really, what Robbie sort of mentioned in terms of being forced to deregister parties, if you think he would have followed through on that would only have benefited the two main parties anyway. The only
Do you
parties
believe
that
it is if Robbie were to deregister, or the fact that he said it and was known by the public caused these concerns? Do you think he did a good job, or do you think that was the right thing to say or to do?
I'm not going to
Vice
necessarily
Manager speaking.
comment on whether that's the right thing to say. You know, Robbie was speaking from his position in wanting to form a stable government. It's his government at the end of the day. He wants to have one that's working for the country. And I think that's what he was trying to achieve there.
I do. What? Well, thank you very much.
Point, yeah, but I don't think he did that though.
Why
But
not?
Callum,
What do you think his
He should have done as
interests were?
much as blah blah blah. Interim governments never worked in the past. All they have to do, the bloody interim prime minister, all he has to do is sit through there for 1 week. Party sort their manifesto, graphics, campaigning, everything, and we're ready for another election.
For another week, because we just had another
But
election.
yeah, but they weren't ready for that election though. That's why everyone recycled their policies. They used the same cabinet, blah blah blah.
What did you expect them to do? They've just come out of the same term, so it's not like we're going to have vastly different policies to publish to the public.
At the end of the day, Sangoose,
Yeah.
politics in the summer holidays is meant to be active. How on earth is politics meant to be active when the opposition have a total of 17 seats and the government have 43 seats? King Robert killed politics and politics activity in Parliament. That's the fact of the matter.
Okay, so
if we were to get the interim government, we could have waited until the summer holidays. We are already back to pre-October levels of voting. So if we were to have another election in the summer holidays, imagine how much higher that would be.
would you support
I think
another election, Sangoose, at the summer holidays?
I'm
welcome
duty
that?
bound to host an election no matter what the people say, no matter the outcome. But what I
would
would
you-
say is
would
I
you-
doubt in such short period of time that any real change would be made to the results. You know,
So do you
was
think that
it
the
was 1
country-
vote separation, then it was 3 vote separation. What's going to happen in the next
Do you
election?
think that
5
the
vote
nation?
separation?
Do you think that the nation will thank the government, like you said they would?
As I say, they'd thank the government. I don't know if they'll thank the government. They're certainly protesting at the moment. I think they'll be happy that there is a government formed and passing bills and all sorts.
But there's not, because you look at the numbers. 35 people support the government's Labour and the Conservatives going into the coalition, and then 105 people don't support it. That's 140 people. That's a pretty big chunk. That's a pretty big.
It absolutely is.
The situation is imminent here.
Have you ever seen a poll about the government that's been positive?
We've seen a lot more positive polls before, yeah.
I mean, the reaction to the current government, coalition government, have been quite, negative or quite controversial. The two sides of these of this coalition. Even we see veteran Tory MPs being violently against it, calling it shambolic. We have Reclaim, of course, the opposition calling the government without even doing anything, calling it a shamble to the democracy. I'm as a host. I believe it's a choice without a choice. That's what I personally believe. But I must say, what kind of direction must we go to? Is it another election, or is it continued coalition government and just let the protests rest? What do you think about it?
There's just no way that anyone can comprehensively and, actually think that a 43-seat government will help political activity.
And they don't even like each other.
You must be, Sangus, I know that you love the king, but you must be stupid if you actually believe that.
No, I don't believe they like each other. Of course not. They're two polar
No, I'm
opposite
not saying
parties.
that they like each other.
They
but
put their differences
43
aside for common benefit at the end of the
No,
day.
they haven't.
Common benefit.
And
The government's not working. They've already argued.
The king threatened.
Do you think
he made a comment? He didn't directly threaten deregistration. He said that he may have to.
Oh, come
Those are
on.
the exact words.
Do you think
Now, I
that's
would like to propose
the
a
correct
question
thing
to yourself, Thomas,
that His Majesty
about-
done? Do you think that's the correct thing that he said, or that is the correct thing he done?
As I said before, I wouldn't comment on that.
Would you comment on that, Reclaim people? Do you think that's
what
the
I'd like
correct
to
thing what
ask
we have done?
for a claim person, Thomas, here today, is what effort did you make to form a proper coalition with the Conservative government where the mathematics, the arithmetic would have led to a
Now,
majority
I
government?
was asleep.
You was
and
asleep.
We promised not to coalition
we during the whole campaign promised not to go into coalition because The other parties are the problem, and we don't want to join the problem. We promised our voters, and
wouldn't you agree, or wouldn't you accept the claim or the criticism against Reclaim now? Is that because of your promise to not form a coalition, it had caused the grand coalition we see today? Because that was the only solution that Robbie,
it's not the only
Her Majesty, would have thought
Robbie
of.
just needed to get his head out the arse and realise that no one's going to think of him as Torm if he forms an interim government for a week and allow
Would you have supported the Lord's government?
Yes,
We don't
or
Lord,
interim.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any
the Lords are an
anyone.
interim government.
They didn't have to do anything. They just sit there.
Do you think it would worth be
wait for summer
posting a
holiday.
poll to the public on whether they'd support it?
Yeah.
Because
Just
Robbie,
support interim
doesn't
government
matter
and
if
wait
it's
for summer holiday.
Robbie's not going to go back. He'll look like a bigger clown than he looks now.
Would you have supported myself as
If
Prime Minister?
anything, Labour and Progressive should have coalitioned.
Progressive, neither the Progressive have promised
That would not have
to
been
form a
enough
coalition.
for a majority.
My
though.
understanding,
Either way, they could
Reclaim,
just do
you
a
have
minority.
from my
with the Reclaim
understanding,
Party. The problem seems to be many people seems to have the problem with the Reclaim Party not forming coalition when it could have been the solution, and this entire stuff would not be happening at all. So because if you were to form a coalition saying, I believe we can have a coalition with the Conservative, there wouldn't be a Labour Conservative grand coalition now. There wouldn't be the protest. After all.
Well, maybe if
Jay
you
is
let me get a
absolutely
word.
right.
Well, no, because actually, if you knew anything about the negotiations, then you'd realise that the Reclaim Party actually offered a confidence and supply for a Labour progressive minority government.
So why did that not go ahead?
Progressive
because
needed
Reba wanted to buddy up and get all the power because
No,
you know.
no, call a spade a spade. It happened because the king threw party leaders in a room and coerced them into forming coalition for his own image. That's what happened.
No,
That's
because
what
this is
happened.
them trying to form an agreement with each other.
This whole national interest is a narrative that you, Doug, Julia, and the king made up.
It's not made up though. It's a genuine concern for the country.
It's not a genuine concern.
Why not?
Well,
No,
because
look,
how on
listen.
earth does a 14-seat majority benefit the country in terms of political activity? Yep. And how does a grand coalition of two parties that have fought each other for 9 months straight, and apart from agreeing on their hatred for France and Ireland, they've disagreed on every single big fundamental issue. Now they're in bed with each other. That's not the national interest. That's personal interest.
Yeah. Look, I just got a DM from one of the constituents who want to keep his name anonymous. He believed that at the end of the day, I quote from him, at the end of the day, Reclaim are the problem. The coalition only really happened to keep Reclaim Party officials out of power. Well, at least that's how I personally see it. So as shadow cabinet shadow Home Secretary for the Reclaim Party and for the opposition benches of the Parliament, you first of all, Reclaim Party have refused to enter coalition.
Mm-hmm.
Which if you had a coalition, if you had a coalition,
we
promised our voters.
You're making it sound bad, as in we didn't want a government, we didn't want all of this.
The voters that gave us our 10 seats.
Yes, that's 10 seats. If you add it up with the Conservative seats, that would be a massive majority.
Now, are you telling me that you're seriously saying that we should have, in fact, lied to our voters?
Well, hang on,
no, but that would if that were to happen eventually. Now, right now in the government that is a Reclaim Conservative government, it will have a lot less fuss than the current government, the Grand Coalition, which have, as you see, caused the violence, which you again refuse to condemn.
We put our voters first.
Well, hang on, because there is an alternative here that doesn't involve a coalition, and that would be the Reclaim Party offering supplying confidence to a minority Conservative government. Not to just a Conservative minority vote. You offered it, as you said, to the Labour Reclaim.
We offered confidence to a progressive Labour coalition. Correct me if I'm wrong. That is what we offered.
Okay, did you offer confidence to a Conservative minority?
No, because we don't support the Conservative Party.
That's why we made a separate party, which is.
But then this has caused a grand coalition.
But it's not because
Yes.
we gave them a solution.
You gave one side a solution.
Okay, we gave them a one-side solution. It's not our job. It's not our job to give multiple. We're not going to bow down because the
We aren't the
EC,
Lib Dems,
the EC,
put it that way.
the EC
If you were to have a
leader doesn't
if
want
you
to get
now
off his
travel back
backside
in
and hold
time,
another election.
Thomas,
That's not our
if you
fault.
Shadow Secretary, if you now travel back in time, you know by let's say upsetting some of your voters, which probably voted Reclaim not entirely because of that reason for not forming a coalition, would you have formed a coalition with the Conservatives or Labour?
No.
No. But with all your knowledge here, you know a grand coalition would
No,
force the
no,
coalition.
no,
Would you
no,
have
no.
done that position that which would have prevented it?
Well, because Jay, I think there's something so wrong with you if you think that we would go back on our word. Why would we go back on our word?
Because that would have prevented the grand coalition, which has caused such a fuss
what would
today.
have prevented the grand coalition is if Robbie kept his nose out of politics. Robbie just formed the
It's his
interim
government.
government for a week. I don't care if it's his government.
It's a very important fact of the matter.
What is it?
We could have done a never-ending cycle of elections if you guys liked.
Is it Doug's government?
Who's Doug? No, not Doug.
Is it
Not
Julia's
not the
government?
puppet master.
Is it Julia's government?
So Thomas, you refused to take. So that's what basically
It is my
you say.
government.
Meeting. Why were you three at the meeting if it's not your government? Why is the EC chair getting involved?
That's very interesting, isn't it?
Because I'm a very influential person in
You're not
politics.
that. You're not that.
Why? Sorry, wait. Why would they need your influence?
They don't need my influence. They are
So why were you
very
there?
delighted
Why were you
and
there?
privileged to have it from
Why were
me.
you there?
So Thomas, let's go back.
No, we've been in the circle, Jay.
You can't be bothered to get off your backside.
Yeah. So just to
Is it-
conclude, what do you think? So Reclaim would not take the blame of the grand coalition. You entirely believe it is His Majesty the King's, let's say, responsibility to cause that he caused this grand coalition and the violence here. Is that right?
What do you mean? I did not understand a word you just said.
Is that entirely His Majesty's fault?
Yeah, it is. And it's also the fault of those who didn't accept the proposal that we gave them.
I see. Well, that's what Reclaim would have said. And Sangoose, would you think that Reclaim should bear some responsibility, or do you think the King also have some shared responsibility for the current violence and unrest?
He organised this. Why would he think that the King should take responsibility? He organised.
You personally,
he helped organise?
I don't think the king is responsible for this because ultimately he just asked the parties to work together, which they did in the end.
He didn't ask. He coerced. He threatened to register
coerce
parties, and that was a threat.
He mentioned that it might be a possibility.
He literally said
Yeah, it's a possibility. No,
it
was. He mentioned it might be a possibility if they didn't submit to his demands. That's
You know,
what it was.
He didn't demand.
Mark
He
always thought he
requested.
was stupid, but I always thought he was joking.
Me?
Yeah, you.
No.
Is there anyone else called Sangoose in here?
The deep state is very much a real thing.
This is very much my opinion on the matter. And I
Yeah,
think
well,
it was in the national
unfortunately, your
interest.
opinion
This is why AA is failing as a company.
AA is
Well-
not failing. It's better than ever.
AA is
Well-
failing.
RAC
Well, let's conclude.
Yes,
Let's conclude this conversation as we have to move to the next part with the call-ins in. So, moving onward, what do you think Robbie, His Majesty the King, should do to stop, of course, end or put an ease to this constant
Who answers
arrest?
first?
But any of you?
Force them to resign. God bless.
I'll start off. I think Robbie should abdicate immediately.
Whoa.
That's a strong conviction of mine. I do think after
Of course,
interfering.
the Fenian would say that.
Oh yeah, no, certainly. I understand how this looks, by the way. Very ironic. Who would have thought the Fenian believes in abdication?
Callum, would you support Cillian's idea, or do you think there's something else?
No, I'm not shocked that they don't support
No,
it.
but what should Robbie do? Just tell me what should Robbie do.
Robbie should let it play out. Reba should resign. Not TBE. Marcus should resign. None of them like the coalition, and they know it. They argued in government all day, evening.
Yes, but what should His Majesty do? Because His Majesty the King has started it. So what do you think His Majesty the King should do onwards?
I
did
personally
what?
think that's
Previously
really
called for an election.
from the solution. I think that actually, well, we've already seen the king go pretty fascio anyway. So why doesn't he go full fascio, dissolve parliament, and it's not, is it though? You know, coercing a party leaders into forming a government,
Exactly.
or they do.
Okay, well, if they don't like their government or their coalition, they'll just end it, won't they? They'll call an election and they'll get over with it.
He's already gone pretty fascio, so we might as well go the full extent, dissolve parliament.
What would you say the full extent is, though? Because you were preaching for him to form an interim government of unelected officials. Surely that would be the next full extent.
No, sorry, wait, no. A government of unelected officials to accommodate an election. Do you not understand that process?
Of course, but what are you suggesting he does instead, Thomas? What is the fascist
What I'm suggesting is that he goes to the full extent of his fascio capabilities. He dissolves the parliament immediately, and then he forms the interim government until the summer holidays.
Yes. Thank you very much for this session. I hope you all enjoyed the session. This is Jay Chan from GB News hosting the J Factor with many guests with hot debate about the King's involvement in politics and coalition and the civil unrest happening recently. Here to advertisement, and I wish you a good evening and come back soon after.
Now, a party election broadcast by
the Nine Kean Party.
Britain is broken. We have a government we did not vote for and one we do not want, but we have the power to change this. We will continue to take to the streets until we get what we want. We demand a Nine government.
Just got the call that it is a Conservative majority government.
This has been an unprecedented movement.
It looks like the Conservatives might win a majority.
Josh Miller has been found guilty of corruption.
It's a fucking shambles from the top to the fucking bottom!
Time to take your seat.
People shot and it's in! What you? You got your
Hello guys, welcome back to the J Factor. Jay-Shan is currently taking a quick break, doing his makeup again.
Yes, I am. Indeed,
Oh,
Slay.
here he is.
Slay, so true. Right, we still have our guest here. We have a few coins from DNC Mark and your future mods. And welcome back to my show. We have heated debate about the king's role in politics and about our current civil unrest. So let's start with DNC Mark. You are calling very early, and thank you very much for calling in. Do you want to share your thoughts about the current events at the streets? Do you think they are justified? Do you want to condemn them? And what do you think the action should be taken?
Firstly, thank you for having me, Jay. I'll be honest with you. I heard Thomas and Killian say, "Oh, violence isn't the solution," or whatever. Violence is the solution. That's the only way you can actually get stuff done. So, yeah, as you can see, I 100% support everything that's happening at the moment.
Are you involved with the let's say more violent side of the protest?
Violence. I don't actually play Westbridge that often, so no. I've been down there once. I've seen it myself. It's perfectly fine. Gameplay is good. Activity is good. But what's happening behind the scenes is what's actually bad for the country.
I see. I see. So you wouldn't say the Westbridge violence, let's say, is something that has to be concerned about, and you think they're quite justifiable. Is that right?
Okay, let's think about this from a community perspective, not a role play one. Okay, you have people playing the game. You have people playing Westbridge. That's something that's actually good. You know, it brings in revenue. People are happy being in the group. But when you have someone forcing people to actually do something they're not, they don't want to do, as in forming a coalition, for example, you get lower activity, like we've seen in the King's Speech. The King's Speech went from having almost a perfect attendance of 100% in the Commons to what, less than 70% of commoners being there. That's how you kill politics. That's what we tried to avoid for the past couple of months, and it's happening again.
So you believe it is both in the role-play sense and a community sense, a wider sense, the King's decision, or His Majesty the King's decision on, let's say, pressuring parties to form a coalition was incorrect?
Of course. I mean, I've already said the community sense type of thing, but in terms of roleplay, he broke his constitutional duty. He interfered in politics. He brought in the advice of 3 people who are extremely biased behind the scenes. You have Julia, who's the former Governor General of what's called New Zealand, as well as Gibraltar. She has good ties with Reb Astor and the Labour Party. You have Doug, who's one of Reba's closest political allies and a huge supporter behind the scenes, also giving them advice. And you have Sangus, even though he left. I mean, he's not the most politically partial person in here, but he definitely does have a leaning, and that's against the Tories, for example. That's against Reclaim, as we've seen. So having these 3 people give them advice was definitely something that broke, the constitutional
impartiality
duty
of the king.
Yeah, exactly. It broke his constitutional duty.
Do you think that moving from now on, as of course, it didn't seem like, were you an MP? If I remember, what was your political journey?
I was an MP for the Conservatives. I was Chancellor of the Exchequer, and then I was Deputy Prime Minister as well under first TBU, so the British Union, and then Ben. So,
yes, that's why I remember you. So as a former Conservative MP, just like myself, I went on the career of doing GB News show, just like the in real life Tory MPs, after being unelected by their constituents. Well, DNC Mark. So now, do you still have the confidence in the Conservative Party role in politics? Because you apparently you were very recently a Tory MP.
I've left the Tory party months ago. I believe in April. My leave wasn't necessarily, because I was against the party at the time, but after seeing the coup by Margaret Ormonti, by the British Union, and by Michael Rothschild against Ben, I lost complete confidence in the party eventually, and I would say the party has lost a lot of its meaning. It's slowly regaining it, but the Grand Coalition happening just broke it again.
I see.
Yeah.
Well, I see. I feel. Well, I understand what you feel. Well, DNC Mark. So moving from now on, as a person who apparently worked in government, His Majesty government very closely under His Majesty Robbie, what's your advice or what's your message to His Majesty the King moving from now on? How do you think his role could be on, let's say, ending this chaos?
I mean, it's a simple idea. I don't think a monarch should directly interfere in something like politics. We heard people like Cengiz say that it's for stability or whatever, or like we're gonna see another election that's gonna have the exact same results. But you have to keep in mind, number one, Andrew Hodge left the Labour Party immediately after the results of this second election, and Andre was one of the main proponents of reform within the party. He was one of the people actually campaigning for the party. He was doing all of the work behind the scenes. So if we did have a third election, I do believe the results would have been completely different. Number two is when we let politics play out, we actually have people engage. That's how you keep growing a community. I've done this not just in the UK, but outside of it as well in other communities, and that's the only way things actually work out. So Robbie, even though I respect him, he made a mistake, like a huge one. He used to attack Connor and Torm for interfering or whatever, having a Lord's government, but what he did effectively caused the exact same results. Regardless of the means.
I see. Do you think he should step down and leave it to the king?
No. It's just one mistake. He can easily...
because we have an audience, we have a guest here who's quite passionate. Believe he should step down.
Well, that was a satirical conviction. I want to clarify. That was a satirical conviction. I don't think I think abdication would fuel the fire, so to speak.
I see. Oh, that's another word. Sorry. Well, DNC Mark. So, so there are some criticisms from the many DMs I'm right now getting from Discord and on my emails. It says they believe that the Reclaim Party should be taking some responsibility over the formation of Grand Coalition. If they were to form a coalition with either Labour or Conservative, it would have been a majority, and it would have been would have avoided the first right that we face right now. Callum, would you not like to stand in front of the camera? Thank you very much. So would you agree with that statement or the argument that those people have made?
No. I think they forget that the root of this problem is, being forced into doing a coalition. If you just let politics play out, we would have gone into a third election, and I think things would have turned out fine after the third one.
You do have confidence that a third election would be, let's say, a solution, or would have things turn out to be better?
Like I said, the main proponent of Labour's reforms, the main person behind the campaigning, behind almost everything in the Labour Party, Andrew Hodge, left the party already. You have seen the chief of staff, I believe, or someone else also leave the party. You have seen their chief whip leave the party. So there have been major changes in the Labour Party, which would have made it lose a lot of support. So yeah, I think the Conservatives would have came out on top on the third election.
I see. Thank you very much, DNC Mark. And I would invite you to stay here for more call-ins as we move on with the discussion. Now, let me move on with your future Mart. I'm not sure if he's on. He is on mute now on my screen. Hello, how are you?
I'm very fine. Sorry. I'm. Sorry, I just had to fix an issue. I'm fine.
Okay, so are you a member of the House of Lords, as I was told?
No, I'm a member of the House of Commons. I sit with the Reclaim Party.
You still was the Reclaim? Oh, you're on the Reclaim side. Yes.
Yeah.
There was another person who was a House of Lord who came in and gone. Never mind.
You'll be hard pressed to find someone that is pro-coalition.
It is hard. Well, so addressing to the claim, which was previously addressed by Thomas, do you think Reclaim if you were to go back in time with your current memory, would you have formed a coalition with Conservatives or with Labour to avoid the Grand Coalition?
I think that, in my opinion, it would have been better to form a coalition with the Conservative Party, in my opinion, because the Labour Party is, of course, not a party that suits the values of the Reclaim Party, even though in coalition governments we have to compromise our values in order to make things work out. With the Labour Party, we would be compromising too much of our values, and we can already see it with the Conservative Party, where in the state opening we saw Conservative members of Parliament hearing a Labour Prime Minister, which was very unusual. And not only that, but I feel that it was a backstabbing, and it would be better to form a coalition with the Conservative Party because we would be risking less, but in my opinion, instead of forming a coalition, I would be better suited if they formed a confidence and supply agreement, which would have not let us enter into government, and we would still pressure the government to accept certain things from us.
I see. So you would have rather have, let's say, by turning back on one of your electoral promise to not form coalition, but instead forming coalition with the Conservatives to avoid the Grand Coalition.
So I stand with the party because I do not want to form a coalition, but if it's the last thing left to do, I think it would be the best to form a coalition. But in my opinion, generally, Reclaim should not form a coalition unless it is really necessary to form out one.
Do you think it's a really necessary time now if you were to enter a coalition talk?
In my personal opinion, I believe so. It is a necessary time, but the mistake has already been done by the Conservative side.
Okay, so what I'd just like to say to Martin is that we actually proposed a confidence and supply.
Yeah, I know. I've heard from Ben. I think, yeah.
So we
I
didn't
think
make the
the
mistake.
Progressives did too.
No. You're going to let me finish.
Yeah.
We didn't make the mistake here.
So you wouldn't accept?
No, I'm not accusing you of making a mistake.
We gave the solution. They chose not to take it.
Yeah,
you can't force feed.
I can see Thomas.
I'm not saying no.
Oh my God.
I'm not
Let
saying.
me finish. You can't force feed.
Oh, I think he disconnected.
I would just like to address the claims that Thomas made. I'm not forcing anything. I agree to this sentiment that it should be a last resort, and I heard that they were offering a coalition and supply agreement, and same with the Progressives too, that they wanted to offer a coalition and supply agreement. But I think that a coalition supply agreement or a confidence supply agreement, or a coalition agreement should have been the last resort. But yeah, I mostly support with Thomas's statement.
I see. So you wouldn't accept claims from some of my audiences saying that Reclaim should probably take some be held accounted to the current situation.
I think. Sorry, I had. Can you repeat it, please? Possibly.
So would you, let's say, just like other Reclaim MPs, would you just not accept the argument that somehow Reclaim should take the responsibility for the current Grand Coalition?
Reclaim should not. Reclaim is not responsible for this. Reclaim just simply offered a coalition supply agreement. It offered it. It's not its fault because the Reclaim Party offered a solution to it. So did the Progressive Party, and it's not the fault of the opposition that we are in a grand coalition. It's the fault of Labour and Conservatives ditching the us reform and progressives at the last minute. So it's not the fault of the Reclaim Party because of the Grand Coalition.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, and moving on to the role of the king. Do you think the king made a mistake by let's say
Right.
pressuring the formation
Yeah,
of
he made
the
a huge
coalition?
mistake. I stand with the sentiment of everybody here that the king made a huge mistake, and he should not interfere with the politics of this community.
I see, and he broke his constitutional duty by having a, let's say, quite invasive attempt to the UK politics. And moving on, what do you think His Majesty should be doing from now on, from this at this moment? If he is listening to this to this show right now, what's your advice to His Majesty?
I think that His Majesty should act in an impartial manner, as it is his constitutional duty to do so, and leave it to the hands of, example, the Cabinet Secretary, which is basically the one who recommends to His Majesty to form government and actually is the one where party leaders contact to form a government. His Majesty the King should only act in an impartial manner, and I think that there are better suited people who are able to do this instead of His Majesty.
Okay, thank you very much for your input. I would invite you to keep yourself here and for further conversation. And I'm very glad. So coming from the two core wins, what do you think, Thomas? Do you agree with?
I agree completely with Mark. Let's be clear. Robert has been a symbol of stability ever since the crisis happened, and he's had a very successful reign. However, this is a blip. Actually, it's not a blip. This is a very, very, very big error. You know, if this was Torm, this would have ended. This would have ended him. But because it is Robbie, and because he has such a stellar track record, he will be given another chance, and he deserves it because he knows what he is doing. He made a mistake. He's human, and let's also not forget he is Canadian, so he will struggle. But the fact of the matter is, we need to realize we were not in the wrong. Anyone that says that Reclaim was in the wrong are making excuses for the incompetency of the government. Additionally,
So you clearly, I mean, as a Reclaim yourself, you wouldn't accept this argument.
Well, I wouldn't
Rich,
accept
that's
this
a complete
argument.
deflection. That's a complete deflection from the
It
failure
is
and
a complete
complacency of the
deflection,
government. It's actually, this is a narrative that has very been easily woven into the media, which I'm not sure why. When I suppose the objective truths are right in front of us, Jay. They formed an awful coalition, and they're now facing the music, and they don't like it. So now there are narratives being spun about Reclaim's complacency. We've not been complacent at any.
So you wouldn't just let's say, even if it is argued that you should be taking responsibility, you wouldn't have to say.
We do not take the responsibility for the failures of other parties and their failures to form a stable government and their failures to win an election. That's not a burden we're going to take off their shoulders. No, why would we take responsibility for that?
I see. Thank you. Thank you very much for your input. Well, it is 10:56. I believe we still do have some mini coins waiting at the app, and I'm having a look right now. I believe Jack is listening is waiting at the call. Oh, he's not anymore. So
He's already here. He's here.
Oh, is he here? Hello,
Yeah.
Jack.
Hello.
Hello, Jack. You are possibly the last few coins of today's show. So, what do you think about today's event, about the civil unrest? Do you think the violence are justified?
I think, yeah, yeah, I think so, because the public
need to get their voice out some way. And if the king and the government won't listen to them, they need to make them listen to them.
Do you think, are you personally involved with some of the more violent part of the protest?
Nah, I played Westbridge today. I'm actually on Westbridge right now, but I'm just I'm on LES team.
I see. And talking about, let's say, because that's the topic of today's, do you think the king should fail the people? Do you think the king, let's say, that was an incorrect decision that he made, or the wrong thing that he said by, let's say, by what people call a more invasively interference of the government of British politics?
Yes.
And what should he do coming forward?
I think he should listen to the public.
And should he correct what he did wrong?
Yeah,
I think he's gone past that point.
I don't think you can correct this kind of crisis unless you're Reba Astor and other elected officials.
So your message, let's say, to the king or Reba, what if they are listening to this show right now, what is your advice to them? What do you want them to do now?
Resign.
To resign and call another election?
Yeah.
Do you believe that another election will be beneficial?
It could be very beneficial.
I see. Well, and also on the last point, which is the part on whether Reclaim should be taking responsibility for not forming coalition and therefore resulting in a grand coalition. Do you think Reclaim should be taking this criticism, or should they not?
No. I think they put in their campaigning or whatever that they weren't going to form a coalition, and they stuck to the word and they haven't formed a coalition. So
I see. Well, thank you very much for your input. We have 30 seconds left until 11 o'clock.
Free Jack Lambs, wrongful ban. Free Jack Lambs.
Thank you. And thank you again. Thank you very much for all my guests and all the inputs for today. Both people in the DMs, and I am sorry for people who haven't made it to today's waiting in the call and haven't made it for today's show. And again, thank you very much, Thomas. Thank you very much, Callum and Mart, Jack and DNC Mark and Cillian for today's input. It's a very spicy debate happening here today. And thank you very much for everyone who made contribution by DMs, by call-ins in the server. Always get involved with what you think of the current situation. And let's say God bless this community and the UK. So we'll see you next weekends, and Saturday and Sunday in the evening. It was a very long show today, and I believe many people have delivered the point very well. So thank you very much for everyone watching and everyone engaged. Good night.
Now, a party election broadcast by
the 9 Kean Party.
Britain is broken. We have a government we did not vote for and one we do not want. But we have the power to change this. We will continue to take to the streets until we get what we want. We demand a 9 government.
I'm 9 Kean.